8,336 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, a metal lander sinks into total darkness. Its light switches on. The beam is small. The water around it is 1 degree above freezing. The pressure is 800 atmospheres. That is the weight of an African elephant standing on your fingernail. Nothing about this place should be alive. And then something moves. Pale, rosy, smaller than your hand. It has no scales. You can almost see through its skin. This is the deepest vertebrate ever recorded on Earth, and nothing about it is normal. Look at it carefully, because this is not the monster you were expecting. You clicked on this video imagining teeth, enormous eyes, fangs that glow, a predator sculpted by nightmare, and you got a fish that looks like a pale tadpole with a soft, translucent body, drifting slowly across black sediment in a place where every other vertebrate on Earth would fail. The instinct is to feel disappointed. Then the instinct changes, because the more you understand what is happening around this small body, the more absurd its existence becomes. At 8,136 meters, filmed in the Izu-Ogasawara Trench off the coast of Japan in 2022 by a team led by Alan Jamieson of the University of Western Australia, this snailfish, a species of Pseudoliparus, broke the depth record for any fish ever seen alive. The previous record was in the Mariana Trench. This one beat it by over 150 meters, and it did it in a body that looks like it should collapse if you touched it. That is the first reversal. This animal is not surviving despite being fragile. It is surviving because it is fragile. To understand why, you have to understand what the ocean is doing to it in every second of its life. Think about pressure for a moment. Most people imagine it as weight, as something crushing, something that presses in from the outside like a fist closing on a can. But at 8 kilometers down, pressure does not act like a fist. It acts on molecules. It reaches inside cells and pushes proteins into shapes they were not designed to hold. It changes how enzymes bind to their targets. It makes cell membranes rigid in some places and leaky in others. It attacks the machinery of life at a scale you cannot see and cannot feel. Your body at this depth would not explode. That is a myth. It would dissolve chemically from the inside. Slowly, silently, as every protein inside you failed at a slightly different rate. Your enzymes would stop cutting the molecules they are supposed to cut. Your nerve signals would misfire. Your cell membranes would stop letting the right things through. You would not feel a shock. You would just stop working. Every 10 meters you go down in the ocean adds another atmosphere of pressure. At 8,000 meters, you have added 800 of them on top of each other. That is roughly 80 megapascals, enough force to deform steel plates over time, enough force to reshape the geometry of every molecule in a living cell. Think about what that means for a second. So the snailfish did not evolve armor. Armor would be useless. Armor does not stop molecular deformation. What the snailfish evolved is far stranger. It evolved a chemical. That chemical has a name: trimethylamine N-oxide, TMAO for short. Marine biologists call it a piezolyte, a molecule that stabilizes proteins under pressure. Almost every marine fish carries some. The Hadal snailfish carries an extraordinary amount. Around 7,000 meters, its tissues contain roughly 386 millimoles per kilogram of TMAO. That is close to 8 times the concentration found in surface fish. Its genome has multiple duplicated copies of the enzyme that produces it. 5 copies of the gene called FMO3, when most fish get by with 1. Every time the snailfish sinks deeper, its body needs more TMAO to keep its proteins from unfolding. The concentration climbs almost linearly with depth. It is the reason this animal can exist, where every other vertebrate design has failed. Now here is where the story turns. The molecule that keeps it alive is also the molecule that will kill it. TMAO does not just protect proteins, it changes the internal salt balance of the fish. And there is a physical limit to how much of it a body can hold before that balance breaks. Somewhere between 8,200 and 8,400 meters, the amount of TMAO required to survive the pressure is estimated to be so high that it would destabilize the fish's own osmotic chemistry. The salvation becomes the poison. That is the ceiling. That is the reason no fish has ever been confirmed below roughly 8,400 meters. That is why the snailfish sits exactly where it sits, not 1 meter deeper. Remember that number. It comes back later. And even then, the story of this creature's body has barely started. Because if you look inside a snailfish, and researchers have using CT scans on the specimens that have been carefully brought to the surface, you find something almost impossible to call a fish. Its skeleton is barely calcified. Many of the bones are so soft and thin they look more like cartilage than bone. The skull is not closed. There is an open gap on the top of the head where a real skull should have solid bone. It has no scales. It has no swim bladder, the gas-filled sac that most fish use to control buoyancy. Its body is largely water, held together by soft, gelatinous tissue and a thin, translucent skin so delicate you can see the internal organs through it. Everything a normal fish uses to stay upright and stiff, this animal has abandoned. Everything a shallow water body relies on, it has given up. At first, that sounds like failure. It is the opposite. A gas-filled swim bladder at 8 kilometers down would collapse instantly. Hard, calcified bone forms poorly under this kind of pressure, and it would only give the pressure something to push against. So the snailfish evolved in the other direction. It removed the parts of a fish that pressure could break. It let the water outside match the water inside. It became almost the same density as the ocean around it. Its body is not a vessel resisting the ocean. It is the ocean, wearing a fish. Now look at the first image again. That translucent, delicate creature drifting in the beam of the lander. That is not a weak animal that somehow ended up in the wrong place. That is a body engineered so precisely that it can only exist here. Pull it up too fast, and its own tissues collapse. It is a prisoner of its own solution. And this is where the story stops being about a fish's body and starts being about how a body like this survives one more day. Because there is another problem, a worse one. You cannot see, not with real eyes, not down here. There is no sunlight. There is not enough bioluminescence to matter as a light source. The water is essentially opaque black, forever. If you evolve to hunt with vision, you starve. So the snailfish stopped bothering. Its ancestors, over a few million years, quietly disassembled the machinery of sight. Genome analysis shows degraded visual genes. The pigment melanin, which most animals use to protect skin and eyes, is nearly absent. The eyes are still there technically, but they have lost most of their function. The animal is essentially blind, but it is still hunting, every day, successfully, in total darkness. How? Not with eyes, with skin. Along both sides of its body runs a system called the lateral line. Most fish have it. In the snailfish, it seems to have become the primary way it makes sense of the world. It is a network of tiny sensory hairs embedded in canals just under the surface of the skin. Each one detects the smallest movement of water, a shrimp twitching, a crustacean turning its body, a pressure wave from something small trying to swim, something as subtle as another animal breathing nearby, in a place where breath is only a moving current of water. The snailfish is not looking for its dinner. It is feeling for it. Picture that for a second. A translucent, gelatinous blind fish, drifting through absolute darkness, alone, in water so cold your bones would ache, at a pressure that would flatten a submarine, and it is finding food using the equivalent of a full-body pressure sensor. It cannot see the seafloor beneath it. It cannot see the sediment kick up when something small moves. It only feels the disturbance and turns toward it. There are no lights. There is no color. There is no horizon. There is not even the concept of up and down in the way you would experience it. There is only cold water, black in every direction, and the faint physical whisper of another life form moving somewhere within reach. Picture that. And then remember one more thing. If its prey holds still, it does not exist. That is the entire hunting strategy of the deepest vertebrate on Earth. Wait, drift, feel, move only when something else moves first. Nothing here is what you thought it was. The monster is a small pink body. The armor is a molecule. The eyes are useless. The hunt is done by skin. The animal is drifting in the closest thing this planet has to another world, and we still have not answered the most obvious question of all. What is it eating? Because there is almost nothing to eat down here. Less than 1% of everything the surface ocean produces ever reaches this depth. Every phytoplankton bloom, every fish carcass, every scrap of organic matter that starts falling from the sunlit layer. Most of it is consumed, decomposed, or stalled in the water column long before it arrives at the bottom of a trench. By the time you get to 8,000 meters, the pantry is nearly empty. The Hadal zone is one of the hungriest places on Earth, and yet the snailfish is feeding, regularly enough to grow, regularly enough to reproduce, regularly enough to sustain a small population in one of the emptiest habitats known to biology. Something is arriving, something is being caught, and whatever that something is, the entire existence of the deepest vertebrate on Earth depends on it. That answer changes everything about what this animal actually is, because the snailfish is not really a creature of the deep. It only lives there. What sustains it comes from somewhere else entirely, from a place it will never see, from a chain that begins with sunlight it will never touch. And that answer is where the story begins to open into something much larger than a fish. The answer is falling right now, above your head, in every ocean on Earth. Marine biologists call it marine snow. Tiny fragments of dead phytoplankton, fish scales, animal droppings, gelatinous debris, microscopic bodies broken open by decay. Every second of every day, a slow, silent snowfall of dead surface life is drifting downward through the water column. Most of it never reaches the bottom of a trench. Bacteria eat it, other animals grab it, currents carry it away. But some of it, over years and decades and centuries, does arrive, and when it arrives, it feeds a small kingdom of scavengers. The main tenants of the Hadal zone are amphipods, small crustaceans closely related to the sand fleas you would find on a beach. In the trenches, though, they are everywhere. They swarm. They colonize every falling scrap. When a fish carcass drifts down from higher water, or a squid dies overhead, or something larger sinks into the trench, the amphipods find it within hours. They cover it. They strip it. They are one of the only reliable engines of life this deep, and the snailfish eats them, not with teeth, with suction. Its mouth is soft, but the muscles around it can generate a sudden inward pressure that pulls prey inside before the prey can react. It cruises the sediment. It waits. It feels the amphipods moving through the water, and when one gets close enough, the snailfish opens its mouth and inhales it. The deepest vertebrate on Earth is essentially a slow, blind vacuum cleaner, powered by dead things falling from a sky it cannot see. That is the trick. The whole world down there is built on the falling scraps of the world up here. The snailfish is not a resident of the abyss in any real ecological sense. It is a customer. It lives at the end of a supply chain that begins with sunlight hitting phytoplankton 8,000 meters above its head, and ends with a single amphipod being sucked into a mouth in the dark. That changes the meaning of everything you have seen so far. The strangest vertebrate on this planet is entirely dependent on the surface ocean. If something breaks up there, it starves down here, silently, without warning, without a signal reaching us. It would just stop appearing on lander cameras, and we would have no way of knowing why. The fragility is not just in its body, it is in the entire chain that keeps it alive. Now here is a question that changes the story again. How long has this animal actually been down there? If you look at the family the snailfish belongs to, the Liparidae, most of its cousins live in shallow water. Cold coastal seas, rocky tide pools, kelp forests. There are hundreds of snailfish species, and the vast majority of them have never seen the deep sea, which means the Hadal snailfish is not an ancient inhabitant of the trenches. It is a recent immigrant. Genome studies suggest that the ancestors of the deepest snailfish only fully adapted to the Hadal zone within the last few million years. In evolutionary time, that is almost yesterday. It is the equivalent of a species that just moved into a new neighborhood, and within roughly 1 million years they spread across multiple Pacific trenches, Mariana, Japan, Izu-Ogasawara, Kuril-Kamchatka, carrying their genome-level modifications with them. So the deepest vertebrate on Earth is not a relic. It is not a leftover from some earlier world. It is an experiment. It is what happened when a group of ordinary shallow-water fish, chased by predators or squeezed by competition, kept edging into deeper and deeper water, and eventually crossed a threshold none of their relatives could cross. That changes the emotional shape of this animal completely. This is not an alien from another era. This is a new arrival, learning to live in the most extreme habitat on the planet, in real geological time, using duplicated genes and a chemical trick, and a body that had to give up almost everything a fish is supposed to have. And it is not alone in the trenches. But it is close, because now we have to talk about the ceiling. Remember the number from before, somewhere around 8,200 to 8,400 meters. That is the depth beyond which TMAO chemistry stops working. That is the depth beyond which no fish has ever been confirmed alive. But the ocean does not stop there. The Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in the Mariana Trench, goes down to roughly 11,000 meters. That is nearly 3 kilometers deeper than the snailfish record. So what lives in that gap? Not vertebrates. As far as we know, nothing with a spine has ever been documented there. What we find instead are invertebrates, sea cucumbers, holothurians like Elpidia, that drift over the sediment at more than 10,000 meters, amphipods, some of them unusually large, microbes, foraminifera, gelatinous bodies that do not carry the same biochemical baggage as a fish. The deepest 2.6 kilometers of our planet's oceans are, by every observation we have, off limits to vertebrate life. Not because we have not looked. We have looked. Since the 1950s, expeditions have dropped nets, cameras and landers into the deepest trenches, and no fish has ever come back from the bottom quarter of the ocean. That is a physical border on this planet, not a legal one, not a technological one, a biochemical one. There is a floor to where an animal with a spine can go, and the snailfish is standing on it. That is not a fun fact. That is the border of a kingdom. Think about that. There is more planet beneath this small pink fish than any vertebrate has ever explored, in any way, by any species, ever. Not through evolution, not through accident, not through curiosity. The deepest quarter of the ocean is a place where our entire branch of the tree of life simply does not go. And here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because that isolated, unreachable, apparently untouched world is not actually untouched. In the last decade, researchers began pulling amphipods out of the deepest trenches and testing them. What they found is one of the quiet horrors of modern biology. Those amphipods, from the Mariana Trench, from the Kermadec Trench, from other Hadal environments, carried significant concentrations of industrial pollutants in their bodies, persistent organic chemicals like PCBs, compounds that were banned in most of the world decades ago but never fully broke down, compounds that had somehow, through decades of ocean currents and slowly sinking particles, found their way to the deepest habitats on Earth. Microplastic fibers have also been detected in the guts of Hadal amphipods at multiple sites, in study after study, and the snailfish eats those amphipods, the most isolated vertebrate on this planet, living where no light has ever fallen, at a pressure that would destroy almost any human-made object, is quietly eating our chemical fingerprints. Every meal. There is no truly untouched place on this planet anymore, not even at the bottom of the ocean. That small pink body drifting in the beam of the lander is not isolated. It is connected to you, through amphipods, through marine snow, through phytoplankton, through ocean currents, through the atmosphere, through decades of chemicals we thought we had left behind, and that connection is not always clean. Now here is the part that makes this story hit differently. The reason the snailfish lives in the Izu-Ogasawara Trench, and not somewhere else, may partly come down to temperature. The Mariana Trench is the deepest place on Earth, but the water down there is very cold, and the food supply, according to Jamieson and his team, is thinner. The Japanese trenches, including Izu-Ogasawara, receive water from a global current system that starts near Antarctica, sinks, and travels north across the Pacific, warming very slightly along the way. By the time it reaches the trenches off Japan, it is still just above freezing, but it is warmer than the water in the Mariana. Not by much, less than a degree. That tiny thermal difference appears to be enough to change the ecology. It supports slightly more life. It allows the snailfish to push further down, which means the deepest vertebrate on the planet exists, partly because of a fraction of a degree of warmth that travelled from the other side of the world. And that current system is being disrupted right now. The circulation of Antarctic bottom water is changing, warming oceans, melting ice, shifting salinity. The machinery that feeds this trench is being altered in real time. The most isolated animal on Earth depends on a global system it has no way to see, no way to respond to, and no way to escape. That is not resilience. That is exquisite vulnerability, hidden inside what looks like extreme toughness. Now think back to the beginning, the lander in the darkness, the small pink body drifting into the beam. Your first assumption was that you were looking at a monster. Look again. There are no teeth here. There is no fear response in you that would fire when you saw this animal. It does not gnash. It does not lunge. It does not glow. It has degraded eyes, a soft skull, a chemical for a shield, a body engineered to be almost the same density as water, a hunting strategy based on feeling prey through its skin, and a life entirely dependent on scraps falling from a sunlit world it will never see. It is not a monster. It never was. Monsters are what evolution makes when you need to intimidate rivals. Down here, there are no rivals. There is only the pressure, the cold, the darkness, the hunger, and the falling snow of dead things from the surface. The snailfish did not need to be terrifying. It needed to be small, soft, patient, and chemically clever. The most extreme vertebrate on this planet does not gnash or bite or attack. It waits, it drifts, it feels, it survives, in a place where every other vertebrate design would fail, by being the exact opposite of what our imagination expects from a deep-sea animal. That is what winning looks like down here, and that is why nothing about the deepest creature ever found is normal. The strangeness is not on the outside. It is in every choice its body has made to exist at all. Now, the lander's battery is running low. The team on the surface is bringing it up. Before it rises, the light switches off. The beam disappears. The small pink body vanishes into the same darkness it has lived in for its entire life. The seafloor returns to what it always was, before we arrived, before we watched, before we recorded anything. A cold, quiet, sunless world with a soft, blind, translucent fish drifting somewhere in it, feeling for the next amphipod. We did not discover it. We interrupted it, for a moment, and the bottom of the planet goes back to being what it has always been. Dark, freezing, almost empty, occupied by a small pink fish that no one is watching. A fish that is, right now, still there, exactly where the ceiling of vertebrate life meets the floor of the sea.